Okay, we're on watercolor techniques part 2. So last time we practiced doing a flat wash, so like getting an even value, a graded wash, the resist with some kind of oil pastel, doing wet into wet, salt, rubbing alcohol dropped into some watercolor, and a tape resist. So today we're going to go on and do the ones that we didn't quite finish before. And there's lots more than this too, but this is a good starting point with some stuff to play with. So first off, the salt, when it's dry, you don't want to leave it on there. You want to kind of brush it off. So when you rub it off the paper, and I think I had my watercolor a little bit thick when I did this, or you can even maybe take an eraser and get it off, but usually it'll just kind of flake off. It would work a little better if I didn't have my watercolor quite so heavy, but so it looks kind of like this. You get these kind of like speckled effects where you flake the salt off. I think it looks better here than down here where I had the watercolor a little bit too dark, so it didn't quite get to the paper. But up here is kind of what it's supposed to look like, with almost those little like kind of star kind of texture. And then now I have a big mess of purple salt everywhere. And then the tape resist. So I had some masking tape on here. And then I'm going to carefully pull it up. Or you could do the same thing, like if you have stickers in different shapes. You could do this with stickers. You can see my edge isn't totally crisp and perfect right here because the tape wasn't all the way down and the watercolor got underneath it a little bit. But that tape resist works with any kind of paint. You know, you can also do it with like acrylics or oil paints or whatever else, tempera paint, to get those kind of harder edges. And again, you could do it with like a sticker, like you had star stickers or something else that you wanted to put down and then paint on top of. So the next one, saran wrap. I didn't happen to have any at home, so this was just from like a deli sandwich that I just kind of saved. So I'm going to use some saran wrap or some cling wrap. It also works. You can make a neat texture if you have bubble wrap, you know, the stuff that things come in when you mail order them sometimes. So I'm going to, let's see what color I want to use with this. So the idea would be that you put down some watercolor first. You'll do some red and purple, kind of let them blend together a little bit. And then dip some saran wrap in there, just kind of, and then the saran wrap kind of left a funky, cool texture that'll look neat when it dries. So you can do that with saran wrap. You can also get a slightly different texture with bubble wrap. So it's just this, you know, putting a little bit of this stuff in the wet watercolor and getting a texture out of that. Another thing that you can do is to splatter paint a little bit. So for that, you want to maybe not have your paints and stuff too close to your Chromebook or your phone or whatever. But you don't want to do it if you're splatter painting from really, really far away. And you can also, you know, you can put some newspaper down under this or something else. But like I already have watercolor on my Chromebook. But anyway, it works better if you have a stiffer brush or even an old toothbrush that you don't use anymore. Like, don't use toothbrush you use every day because you're going to end up with watercolor in your teeth and that won't be pretty. But you can even do this with an old paintbrush or an old toothbrush. But you can just kind of take some watercolor and kind of flick it. This watercolor pen, this brush is a little too soft to do this with. Let me get a little more water on there. So you kind of flick it. I'm just like tapping the top of my brush with my finger, so I'm not like doing it from really, really far away and making a huge mess. And of course you could combine these. Like I could do a flat wash and then I could do some splatter painting on top of it. I could do saran wrap and then splatter paint on top. So you can combine these too. All right. So the next one down here, and it doesn't really matter what order you do them in. I just left a little space between my boxes so that they didn't run into each other, because watercolor does run quite a bit. So the next idea is lifting. So watercolor, it's transparent, so it's not like, you know, if you mess up with acrylic paints or do something you didn't mean, you can't really, you can go over top of it because it's opaque. However, watercolor is see-through, so if you mess up, you can't really paint over it. You're still going to be able to see the color underneath. But sometimes if I get something on there that I didn't mean to, like say I get a little like extra drop of blue there and I didn't want it, if you get it quick enough, you can use a tissue and pick it up quickly and get it a little bit lighter, but don't rub the paper. You're going to kind of rub the fibers of the paper off. But you can also use lifting it intentionally as a texture. So maybe I'm going to do some kind of wet into wet painting here. And then I decide I want some more texture in there, or I want it a little bit lighter. So you can take just a Kleenex or a tissue and just blot it a little bit and take up some of that color and also get kind of a nice texture. So you can get it a little paler and also get some different textures in there by like using a Kleenex to lift some of it. And then if you lift too much, you can always go over top of it more. But just don't rub it or you'll rub the paper fiber off. But you can use a tissue to lift it a little bit. Another texture is sponge painting. So you might have done this with other things in the past. This is just a regular like kitchen sponge that I just cut a piece off of. Or you can use different kind of sponge. There's actually the kind with the scrubby stuff on one side because that's just what I happen to have around my kitchen. So you want to, activate your watercolor first. If your sponge is stiff and hard, you can just rinse it in a little water and then wring it out. But you want it to be damp, not super sopping wet. And then I'm going to dip it into some of the paint that I already have some water in that I've kind of activated. And then if it's too wet, you're not going to get that like kind of nice spongy texture. You can think about times that, you might want to use these different things. Like, if I'm doing something that's a texture like sand or trees or something, maybe I want to, paint it yellow and then sponge some green over top when that dries or something to get that kind of texture. But you can even, I could do a lift or I could do another thing and then sponge on top of it. All right, so you can combine these things together for different effects. And then the last one that I have on here, and again, you can play with on another sheet, like kind of combining some of these things together too. Or what happens if you paint a really dark color, like what if you, paint the whole thing dark and then sponge a really light color on top after it dries. But another thing you can do is drip it and then kind of move it around. So if you have a straw, I don't actually have a straw at my house, so I can't use a straw for it. But if you get your watercolor pretty wet, you can get some drips on there. Maybe I'm going to find a second color and get it thin enough that I can kind of drip it. Okay, and then when you've got some drips on there, you can just kind of, it works better with a straw, but you can just kind of blow it around a little bit, or use gravity to move it in different directions, and kind of play with it like that. But yeah, if you have a straw, you can blow it even more intentionally in whatever directions you want it to go. So those are a few techniques for watercolor for you to start with that you might want to, you're going to do in your sketchbook, and you might want to play around with in some of your assignments in class.